Hi, welcome to 10-Minute University Noontime Chat. I'm Priscilla Robinson, and today I'll be sharing some information and hopefully some inspiration to create pretty and delicious containers. For those of you who are not familiar, the 10-Minute University trademark includes short classes, videos, and handouts on essential gardening information for you, the home gardener. Oregon State University owns the trademark, and Clackamas County Master Gardeners develop and manage the program. Today's class is the 9th in a series of 25 webinars that will help. With the help of the webinars, we hope that you will master your garden. For the complete lineup, please visit the Clackamas Master Gardeners website. Let's get started. I'll focus on utilizing an alternative landscaping concept, edible landscaping in containers. Please explore the many resources at 10-Minute University, including videos and over 50 handouts. Today, Laura Iyer will co-host and facilitate the question and answers following the presentation. Feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box throughout. We will be monitoring and posting pertinent links in the chat box. OSU Extension Service has many science-based publications for everything gardening. Check it out. I use these top 2 publications, Growing Your Own and Vegetable Gardening in Oregon, on a regular basis. So please be sure to visit these resources. Here are some ideas on edible flowers. Please be sure to take a look at those. They will help you to better understand what edible flowers are and staying away from poisonous and injurious plants. Here are some additional safety resources on plants and also on using repurposed wood and staying safe with that. Here's what we're going to cover today. Understand what an edible container is, to understand the care and maintenance of edible containers, to learn some simple elements of design, and to learn tips for early spring plant selection. So edible containers are an alternative to conventional landscape. And, I came to this quite organically because I moved from a house that had some space for gardening to a condominium where my space was limited. I imagine some of you might be in apartments or homes that have very limited growing space. And so how can you utilize containers to fulfill that need? I really love gardening, I love getting my fingers dirty. So, think about where you might have a spot in your home to put some containers there. And as you plan those containers, you want to embrace attractive food producing plants like leafy greens, vegetables, flowers, and herbs. And by the way, leafy greens don't have to be green. On the left, it's featured some Merlot lettuce. I love it. It's vibrant. It looks beautiful, super tasty. On the right, you see a deep purple lettuce with bright green veins ready for a meal. Take a look in your catalogs on the seed displays at your garden center and branch out, try something new. How many of you have been eating flowers? Chances are you've tried a few of these, maybe the broccoli, maybe even the Johnny jump ups. But have you ever tried the herbs from the blossoms from the herbs? When my cilantro bolts, I just snip off those flowers and throw them in a salad. They're delicious. How about dandelions, pea tendrils? There are thousands of possibilities. Ounce for ounce, herbs are the most economically sound crop to grow. So that might be a place for you to start. All these herbs provide culinary delight. Some can be dried for future use, some are fresh right onto your table. When establishing plants in a container, think how you might use it in your cuisine. After all, that's kind of our motivation here. I really appreciate sugar snap peas in the spring for their flowers, their tendrils, and their pods. In this container, I'm letting the peas wander and cascade down. It's really interesting and beautiful to look at. And I'm straying away from the traditional fencing uh, growing method of the peas. So I think the benefits of container gardening are straightforward. It's a dual purpose landscape. It's homegrown in a limited space. And growing in containers, you establish a manageable maintenance. Dual purpose landscape. This is at the edge of a deck. And instead of having geraniums or other types of flowers in these pots, we've got a nice variety of leafy vegetables, herbs, gorgeous, ready to pick. The lettuce is grown nice and tight. That establishes a beautiful design, and the lettuce can be picked by the leaf, picking from the outer leaves, or by gently using a knife to cut at the bottom or the base of the lettuce head. Don't pull that plant out, it'll disturb its neighbors. One of the most frequent questions I get, no matter what I'm teaching about vegetable gardening, is, well, what should I plant? And my advice is simple: plant what you like, eat what you plant, and try to experiment when you can. Each of these pots has vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Springtime is a perfect time to establish a container, perhaps close to the kitchen door, for ease of snatching up a bunch of fresh herbs. I love mint in all the different varieties, but I don't love it in my garden. It has its roots and runners can just overwhelm and crowd out everything else. So containers are a great place to grow your plants that might be invasive. It's a true benefit of manageable maintenance. Before you get started, you're going to want a game plan. So this is what is recommended. First of all, determine the best location for your pots. What containers to use. Are you going to reuse something you have, or are you getting new pots? How much space is each plant going to need? That might determine what pot you use as well. What's your best growing media? And of course, staying safe with your edible plants. I like this diagram. It asks you, what does the sun do at your home? Well, positioning your pot is the first step. Ideally, you're going to want 6 to 8 hours of sunlight for these plants. After all, sun is their food. So do a little research in your home. What does it look like in the morning, in the noon, or in the afternoon? So the first photo shows the shadows deep in the backyard. The middle shows very little shadows at noon. And in the afternoon, the shadows are deep in the front yard. So, how do you know north and south? Well, your smartphone has a compass. You can also use graph paper to draw a rough sketch of your property or your deck or your fire escape, wherever you're going to be growing things, and place that footprint and figure out how the sun is going to move around there. As you draw your sketch, you'll also want to include significant trees, and don't forget about the neighbor's fence. All those shadows have an effect on how much sunlight your pot will get. Anyway, getting back to your compass, orient your northern exposure and then sketch that down on your plant. Then it's time to do some observations. On a sunny day, go out and make observations and sketch in where the shadows lie. And then those would give you some good sunny spots for your pot. If you have more shade than sun, don't dismay. There are still some crops you can plant, and we'll talk about those later. Also, thinking about the sun, the placement of your plants is important. It's important to plant your tallest plants on the north side of your container and the shorter plants on the south side of the container. That way, each plant has an opportunity to soak up that precious sun to grow. So containers. When purchasing and grouping containers, think color, texture, shape, and practicality. On the left, I like how the grouping allows for different sizes and textures of pots, but that color marries the group. I love the red color containers. They really make those shades of green and yellow pop. It's really a very pleasing, edible vision out on your deck. Galvanized water troughs have really gained popularity for their sleek design and variety of shapes and sizes. Whatever container you choose, make sure it has good holes that drain properly. It's essential to the health of your plants. Here are two different options for clustering and arranging your containers. The grape pots look great together, and the steps have been used to add height, as does that obelisk, an interesting design arrangement. Both gray and black pots create a neutral palette that emphasize the beauty of the flowers and the vegetables. Repurpose or reuse what you already have. Whatever it is, be prepared to put a hole in it and place that hole at the low point. I really like this old wheelbarrow. The, the herbs and the nasturtiums are absolutely delicious looking. Repurpose or reuse what you have. This photo was shared by a friend, and it's from the Seattle Flower Show. It's a surprising prospect, but capitalize on a makeover opportunity. I really like how the bold colors and textures quickly convert the wreck into a spacious, interesting focal point. Shopping for pots can be overwhelming, and I like to take a picture and get measurements of the area that I plan to put my pots before I even step into that shopping arena, whether it be in person or online. There's lots of opportunity to find beautiful pots, but do some planning before you bring it home. Consider plant spacing in the vessel. What will be the mature size of each plant? Also, consider the cultural needs of the plants. The information such as spacing, sun, and water needs is on the seed packets or plant labels. The photo on the far right has dinosaur kale in the center, which will continue to grow up and those leaves will broaden. This is not a bad thing. and it may actually offer the lettuce varieties some shade and shelter from sun and heat as the container transitions from spring to summer weather. Potting mixes have organic matter and minerals to provide a favorable foundation. It's an ideal growing medium to anchor the roots and nourish your plants. It's important to fully hydrate that bag of potting mix before adding it to your container. So, what does that mean? Well, this can be done by adding water directly to the potting mix in the bag with a hose or a watering can. Then you mix it up thoroughly. Then add the soil to your container. A slow release fertilizer should be incorporated into that soil. Remember, this container will need to provide everything for your plants. Now, at this point, you're ready to add your plants. When I'm working with others sort of new to gardening, they are always surprised by all the steps it takes before you actually start the planting. But the rewards of a well planted container is worth that time and effort. Care and maintenance of plants is also referred to those cultural practices like watering by hand or irrigation, regular harvesting, plant attention, and pest management. Regular watering is important. Remember, some of your containers may be under a roof eave or a covered porch and will not benefit from these spring rains we've been getting. In case you're wondering if your plant needs to be watered, test it. Push your index finger clear down to that second digit, about 2 inches deep, and feel the soil. Is it moist? Is it cool? Or is it dry? Be sure to do this on a regular basis. Also, in my household, I try to involve everyone. On the left is my 15-month-old granddaughter, Emma. All she needed was a step stool and an invitation, and she was eager to help out. On the right is my sister, Deb. She was housebound and very ill, yet she thrived with the opportunity to care for her containers of vegetables and and flowers all summer long. Don't ever underestimate the simple joys the young and the old get from helping with the garden chores. It's a great opportunity to share your love. Regular harvesting. If you consistently pick those outer leaves from the kale, the blossoms from the pansies, or the peas, it will urge the plant to continue to grow and produce, and your season will be extended. Your growing and picking season will be extended. Removing dead and dying blossoms promotes more flowering. When root vegetables start to crowd, gently, ever gently, pull out the one in the middle. That will provide space for those two outer plants to continue to grow and develop. Succession planting is also an opportunity to continue to have your containers produce. Succession planting means adding more seeds on a regular basis so your container continues to look spiffy as you harvest delicious plants. This is a really good with radishes. You can plant those about every 2 weeks and you'll be picking radishes for a long time. Container gardening can be very, very dynamic. And remember, we want these plants to look pretty and delicious. So when your plant starts to look a little sad, not looking so great, out it comes. Maybe I'll even eat it. Then I'll replace it with seeds or another seedling. Intensive gardening places plants close together. With lettuce, that's okay. They're light feeders. What's happening in this picture is the leafy greens are leaving little room or light for weeds to get started below their canopy. Notice in the bottom left corner, one little clover starting to emerge. Out it comes. That clover is totally edible, so be sure to monitor the weeds. Weeds compete for resources in the soil. You want to give your plants every fighting chance. It's important to look carefully into your containers for signs of pests. If you see holes or a slime trail, it's a good possibility there are slugs or snails in your containers. With a flashlight in hand, they can be picked off at night. Slugs love those leafy vegetables. The good news is with containers, they're elevated. They're up on a deck, so you'll probably avoid those pesky rabbits. So now I want to give you a little bit of information on how to design your containers and get them get them looking good. And I'm going with a real basic theme with a thriller, filler, spiller method. The thriller is the largest and most striking plant. The filler is a mid-sized plant with contrasting texture and color. And the spiller are plants that trail or cascade down to create interest and draw the eye downward. So this is the practical application. The thriller is the artichoke plant with a dusty green leaves and plenty of texture. This is a perennial that will stay in my container all year long. So I will be replacing the fillers and spillers as needed. The fillers are the pansies, the variegated oak leaf lettuce, and the rainbow Swiss chard. These also provide some camouflage to perhaps the woody stem and the base of the artichoke, adding to your design. The spiller is a healthy chive, just cascading down. So the next important decision to make is, will this container be viewed with from 360 degrees? If so, then your planting design will want to put the thriller in the middle, and then maybe 4 or 5 fillers, and then 4 or 5 spillers, depending on the size of your container. Remember to think about what their mature size will be. At some point, you may need to thin those out. If your container will be up against a wall or a railing, you'll want to go to a planting layout that places the thriller towards the back. And that will give you height in the back and then a cascading vision coming down in the front. So let's review some of the information that we've covered to help you make your plant selections. We are going to perhaps choose patio variety plants because then they are more suited and actually developed to grow at a smaller level. Consider the mature size. What are the sun needs? Your own personal preference. What are you going to want to look at? What are you going to want to eat? What type of brightly colored foliage and flowers are of interest? And then the last one is, are you going to mix it up like our thriller, filler, spiller? Or are you going to go with some symmetry like we saw the lettuce with just variations of color? Those are choices that you're going to want to make before you make your plant selection. So right now, we're looking at early season crops. Early season vegetables are also called cool season crops, and they can be grown in early spring and also into the fall. In general, their seeds will germinate in lower soil temperatures and the plant will grow in cooler temperatures. And so here we can look for some root vegetables. Do any of those look appealing? How about some cole crops? And lastly, leafy vegetables. It's all your preference. And these would be plants that are going to do well now where we've got the cool weather. Soil temperatures, we will want to have somewhere in the 35 to 40-degree range. Let your imagination and creativity grow with your containers. I really love this photograph. I wish it was at my house. I love the pops of color and the shape variations. Really is interesting flower box. Just in case you didn't know, the tastiest and the most tender part of a flower are the petals. I really try to remove the stamens, which are going to have pollen on them and not so tasty. Eat the edible parts and enjoy. So there are lots and lots of edible flowers out there. Just pick the one that works for you. I love the colorful homegrown goodness of my edible containers, and I hope that you will too. As I said earlier in the program, safety is really important. So as a rule of thumb, sample new plants in small amounts due to possible food sensitivities and allergic reactions. So if you've never tried a particular plant, then you'll definitely want to try just a little bit before you find out that you might have a sensitivity. And I want to remind you folks that safety is really important. Here are some resources so that you can be informed about some plants you may not want to add to your container landscaping. And also the use of treated products can result in exposure to harmful chemicals, both for people and the environment. And the chemicals can leach out of the wood. So it's really important to be cautious when you're repurposing old wood. Many thanks for joining us at 10-Minute University. I hope that you've enjoyed this program. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all of you. My backdrop is actually a photo of Ireland from a friend who shared this with me. She went a couple years ago, and it's a farm up in the northern part of Ireland. And we're now going to open the live question and answer period. And so let's welcome Laura.
Hi, everyone. Get my camera well. The questions are very good. You're going to have a good time.
Oh, boy.
But first, I want to start off with someone who says, "Hi, Nana."
That might be that little Emma that we saw in the presentation.
Yeah.
Or Henry, or Katie.
So I think this is a very good question. What are the best ways to prevent or treat pests, insects organically in my containers?
Well, that is a great question. You know, when you're working in containers, everything's really close. And so the first line of defense, I like to say, is actually just hand picking. You can also use water, perhaps your hose with the sprayer on it, and try to physically remove those insects and pests. And also, you know, like I said with the slugs, look for more evidence. Sometimes these insects or pests come out at night. So if you're not seeing them during the day, maybe go out at night. There are some pesticides that are recommended by the OSU, and I would definitely check publications, check the labels on those, And if you have used a pesticide, please, please, please thoroughly wash whatever you're bringing into your home before you eat it. I wouldn't do any hand picking off and just popping it in my mouth. So keep that in mind.
Speaking of containers, does the color or material of the pot change the heat of the soil, which could affect my plants?
Absolutely. Some of the materials are going to be conductors of heat, like the water troughs. Some of them are going to be insulators. And so that could be monitored by using a simple soil thermometer, which are available at garden centers. And some plants like the heat more than others. So
There was kind of a follow-up question to that. If you use a soil thermometer, how deep should you go with that soil thermometer?
you want that thermometer to go in at least 2 or 3 inches, and you want to leave it in there for at least 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay.
So it's kind of the old school thermometer. We're used to the press the button and get a temperature right away nowadays. But soil thermometers are old school and need to go down 3 inches and be in there for a while.
Okay. What ideas do you have for the herbs that you could put in a strawberry pot?
Okay, so the strawberries are perennials and are going to stay in there in a regular basis. So I think the herbs that you want to put in are perhaps some of the short-lived herbs. Say, I think cilantro would go in there nicely. I think parsley could be popped in there. The ones that I want to stay away from are the woodier herbs. Like I would not want to put in rosemary or maybe sage that are going to really spread out their roots and impose themselves on the strawberry. They just might take too much of the space in the soil and too many of the nutrients.
I think she might be talking about those strawberry pots that have, they're tall and like a cylinder. So you would have the opening at the top and then you have all these pockets.
Oh, okay. I was thinking of, yeah. Yeah, by the way, we didn't talk about strawberries in containers, but they work really well. Well, I think in that instance, I would plant what you like. I would, see how much space you have, think about how big that plant is going to get as it grows and matures, and just not overcrowd or overtax them, because those plants are still, the strawberries are still going to need the nutrients and the water. So let's not starve them.
Speaking of water, what do you recommend on how to check the watering requirements of your containers?
Well, they do actually create a moisture sensor that is that you can purchase at a garden center. I don't own one. I have a finger, and probably the most important part is really going all the way up to that second digit, really getting deep. The surface level is not going to be the true monitor. Um, So the other thing that is important is how much rainfall you're getting. I don't know if this pertains to that, but if you've been getting rain and you happen to have a rain gauge, that will give you an idea. Well, my plant has already gotten a 1/4 inch of rain. Maybe I want to give it just a little bit of a sprinkling. So um, regular watering is the most important thing. If you water a lot and then you let your plant dry out too much, that really stresses the plant, and that's going to promote disease or
Okay.
a lower production.
Do you have any ideas on how to prevent powdery mildew on pansies?
No. um, I really don't. Powdery mildew is one of those things. Do you? Do you, Laura?
Well, I'm thinking that powdery mildew is often caused by humidity and is a reaction to the climate, whether it's cool and moist or humid toward the fall.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking if you could cut off the leaves, cut off the powdery mildew and hope it regrows, or go buy a new one.
That was my short answer. But you're my flower person, so thanks for that great answer. It's good advice.
So there are two related questions. One is, how deep should the soil be in the pots? And the second question is, what do you do with the used soil that you've had in your container the following year? If you need to put in new soil, new potting mix each year, what would you do with that, especially if you're doing something like a trough?
Right. Well, I think that the depth of the pot is going to be dependent on what you want to plant. If you are looking to plant a perennial or a large growing vegetable, you're going to want a pot that is a minimum of what I would call like a 2-gallon size or a good 18 inches high. Um, but you can go shallower. You could go as shallow as 12 inches if you're just putting in, say, some pansies and some herbs. So if you've got a container that you love, then, plant to suit that container. As for the soil that I take out of my containers, I bring a lot of that over to my raised beds that I grow at the community center. I really love to grow vegetables over at the community center, and by adding that extra soil, I just mix it in with the existing soil once the soil is workable in the spring.
Okay. It also might depend on how deep the roots grow of your annual vegetables. So if you had
Right.
a really deep container, you wouldn't necessarily have to replace the whole container, possibly just replace maybe 12 inches each year.
It's a good
Then
point.
it's heavy and then you don't have to move the pot,
That's a good point because think about where the roots are going to be.
right? So
Love that.
you know that slide that you had with the artichoke?
Yeah.
How big is that pot?
That pot was 3 feet tall, so
And
36 inches.
do you know the width approximately?
I would just have to guess. I think it was probably about 24 inches
Okay,
across.
okay.
And also, when we're talking about pots, I said that it needs a hole and that it needs to drain freely. There are some pots that are flat and flush. Do you notice how some pots kind of have a little bit of a arch to them? You know, those are the ones that you really are going to drain freely. If it's flat and flush, that hole is right against your deck or your porch, and it's not going to drain as freely. You might have to lift your pot up a little. Speaking of pots,
Yeah, you could buy those pretty feet that you can find at the nursery.
oh, I love those. Yeah.
Um, I had a great question. Can you talk about fertilizing? I know that you suggested adding a soil when you're putting in your potting soil, adding a slow release fertilizer. But in long season vegetables, do you need to add fertilizer toward the end?
You know, different vegetables want different fertilizers, and the slow release is sort of an all purpose fertilizer. So as you get further into your growing season, um, and this is something that I do, is I do add a water soluble fertilizer, and I will water every other time with a very light water soluble fertilizer. As I said, some plants require one nutrient more than others. So doing some research, checking out the OSU publications on plant needs, if you have a particular plant, um, And then you can find those fertilizers at the garden center. But an all-purpose water soluble is going to help your foliage, your flowers, and your production.
Okay. Do you have any advice for what to put in your containers for fall and winter? And I'm assuming the cold crops that you could grow in the fall.
Yeah, the crops that are in the cool weather work really well. I've actually had rosemary, thyme, um, rainbow chard, and kale growing all season long in my containers. I do push the containers up against the wall, and so they get a little bit of protection from the wind. That's an important thing to keep your plants happy, and they get a little bit of, I guess, that radiant heat from the house. But those are the cold crops that I would put in containers. And as far, did they want flower suggestions as well?
I think you could talk about anything.
Okay. Well, let's just say you had a hellebore in a pot. That is a gorgeous plant. It's a perennial. It'll start popping its head out in end of December, early January, depending on what the weather's been doing. This year, mine got iced over with an inch of ice when we had our storm up here in Portland. And you know what? They still look great. So that's a neat plant to put in the middle that could be growing in the winter. And then you could do some fillers around the base of that with those hardier kales and chards, or even herbs.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what time of day is best to water?
Watering is always best done in the morning. And that way we don't have a lot of residual water sitting on leaves as we go into the evening, which then will promote nasty problems. So watering in the morning is always the best.
Here's a racing question. What about containers on wheels? Whee!
You know, I had that in my my presentation, then I thought, that's the sidetrack, but it's a great question. Okay, so remember I said about practicality of pots, and people want to get a nice, big, gorgeous pot on their deck, and then you cannot move that to save your life. So they have these really neat little dollies that are round, some are square, some are even rectangular. And so my advice is to get one of these little dollies and put your pot on that, get it into a position where you think you like it, and then do all of those steps of planting, adding your soil and things like that. Now, wheels are great. Wheels are great.
And make sure that the hole can drain out, right?
Right. Yeah. Make sure that the dolly is not inhibiting that hole in the bottom of the container. Good
We
point.
have a bird question.
A bird question.
Do you have a problem with birds eating your chard over winter?
No. And but I also have a bird feeder out, so maybe they just like the food in that bird feeder better. So my short answer is no. If birds continue to be a problem, there is some very economical netting that can be placed over your pot. I would just be sure to prop up so that you're not crushing your plant with that netting. But so um, just separation is your best prospect. But I didn't have that problem. But thanks to my friend here, he fills the feeder on a regular basis.
Let's see. Oh, one listener recommended putting your used potting soil into your compost. Do you like that idea?
That's an option. Again, everything that we do with Master Gardeners is based on our publications and our research. And if that is the only place that you have to put it, then that might be your best option. But you can do your own research on composting. I don't put the soil into the compost. I just put in my leaves, lawn cuttings, uh, scraps from my vegetables, when I'm trimming them up and cooking. So, check the research. You want, all those microbes to be happy in there.
Going back to the potting soil mix, this is a good question. And I've lost it. No, there it is. If I use soil conditioner and raised bed soil in large pots, what should I add to top off some dirt loss over the winter? Would topsoil be a good idea?
Well, if I was thinking about adding an amendment and I was going to do it in the fall, I would think about putting some manure over the top actually, and or a cover crop. There are great cover crops that you can put in, and then in the spring you turn them under. So that's what I would recommend. And the other thing that I do is actually for my raised beds, and I protect them a little bit from too much rain so that I can get in there and start to work the soil quickly in the spring.
Yeah.
So it's not too wet.
I found that sometimes adding soil to my pots, there's so much difference between soil and potting mix. Heavy soil doesn't necessarily have the air pores for water and air to transpire between the top and the bottom. And soil is usually too heavy for containers. You want those roots they have to do so much work in such a short time and in a short period space that you want them to have the best luck that they can. And potting soil, I think, just pure potting soil is probably the best.
Yeah, everything that they need is in that pot. They don't have an opportunity to search for something else.
Right, right. Let's see. I think we're near the end of our questions, I believe. Do you have anything else you would like to add, Priscilla?
Well, you know what? I'm a science educator, so gardening is just like my real happy place. I get to be the scientist. I get to experiment with things. When something isn't working well, I get to use my critical thinking and try and figure out that problem. And on the educator part, I just really want to share, good information with my family and my friends, and for, just the home gardeners. So, gardening is my happy place. It fits with my vocation. And, if you're new to gardening, don't be afraid. Everyone can grow a green thumb.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're about ready to end.
Okay. Boy, thanks everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
And remember, if you can go to the Metro Master Gardener site to have any unanswered questions answered, and they usually answer within a day or two. You can also go to cmastergardeners.org and look at all our handouts that are available. We thank you very much.